Okay, so I'm gonna be working through the different features you're supposed to add to the weather app. Um, so I'll be just posting them on GitHub, but I figured I'd go ahead and record me just working on them. Okay, so I've already done some of the project setup. So I copied from day 7 the weather continued folder to day 8. I'll go ahead and rename that weather project. And you can see the different files within there. So that's just getting the React app project copied over. And then in your terminal, you should navigate to wherever that is that you copied it, which is module 4, day 8, weather project. If you copied it, like if you cloned it from GitHub and copied it, um, node modules aren't typically stored in GitHub, just because you can easily install them, and it's just like a bunch of repetitive code. um, so you can do ls to check and see if you have no modules already, which would be this folder. If you don't, you would just do npm I or npm install. And then you'll do npm start from the root of the project to start the React server. Okay, so here's where we left off. We have um, a blank home page, and then if we go to the forecast page, we have the forecast URL, and then we've got this default query. We can hit search, we get our spinner, and then we get our cards. All right, and the first task. So we did the project setup. That's done. Our first task is fixing the padding and the spacing on the weather cards here. So, they're just like rubbed up right against the search button, and then they're also right next to each other. And then having them in a column like this, when the page is this wide, doesn't necessarily make sense. You'd probably want maybe 2 or 3 at least in one row, and then start another row and do the next, depending on how many you have. So you can do that just with your own CSS if you want to. You could do something with Flexbox. If you're using React Bootstrap, then you may check and see if they have something already potentially. So there's a lot of ways you could do this. I think some of you in class did. Let's see. Yeah, I think some of you did maybe like card groups with this card layout stuff. Um, And really, actually, all they're doing is just showing you an example of just using the built-in React Bootstrap row and column. So this is just using Bootstrap rows and columns, really. But they just kind of, I guess, put an example in here for you. So if you kind of look at their example, they've got, they like make an array here. So they say like make an array of length 4, which this is just going to be like an empty array. Like if you just did this in the console real quick. You just get an array of 4 with undefined in it, but they're not using any of the values in the map. Like they're just using the index, and then they're like just putting this like underscore to capture that variable name, which is often like you'll see people do that when they like don't care about what it is. So they're just creating an array to map to be able to create 4 cards in this example. It's kind of a fancy example of how to just like loop 4 times. So there's going to be, like in this example, we're going to end up with 4 of these, like 4 columns, 4 cards, or 4 columns, and then each column is going to have a card inside of it. And then they're saying row wrapping that whole thing. So, but then they say like if it's really small, just do 1 per row, and if it's medium, do 2. So I'm guessing, I think this example's for this one here. So this is medium right now, and show it's only showing 2 is my guess. Yeah. And then if we make it small enough, well, yeah, once it's small enough here, you can see it collapses to 1. So that's close to what we want. So I'm going to go into the code, go to forecast, and we kind of need to look at the way that we've set up our code so far. So we've got this forecast component, which has the form. So that is the form, like including the search button is what is in this card. So form, here's our search button right here. And then, if it's loading, we put the spinner, and then we have this forecast display component that we pass the weather data into. And weather data starts off as this empty array. So then if we want to look at what forecast display does, we go to that, which it receives as a prop the weather data, which you can see us passing in right here. So if we don't have the weather data, then we return nothing. If we do have the weather data, that's what this if does. Because there's a moment when we're doing our search, or like when you first get to the page and you haven't done a search, you don't have any weather data yet. So until we have weather data, don't show anything. But once we do, then show this stuff. And we then make these cards here. We then make these cards here, and we have this div. So we can also just kind of look and see what's happening on the page with this little thing here and see, okay, we've got this div, and then that has 3 divs within it. So here's our wrapping div, and then each of our cards. And so I think this is the wrapping div. So we want a row, and then we want column and cards. So I'm going to copy this row and I'm going to put it here instead. So whenever you have more than just one line of JSX that you want to return, it's better form to do these parentheses like that, and then to have this kind of parent JSX element that you put everything within. Because you can only return one element, but that element can have as many children inside it that you want. So we're just sort of wrapping everything we're going to return in this sort of one wrapping parent element. And this is like a special JSX syntax for just like make it an element. I don't care what it is. Like it could be a div. Um, so yeah, just grouping this into one element. And then instead of div, we want a row. And that row comes from React Bootstrap, which it's not going to give me the import for that, but that looks like import row from React Bootstrap /row. So I'll save that. And then when we come back, we can see we've got, now we have div class equals row, which kind of changed stuff automatically. Then we've got our cards. So instead of div, if we look in here, we got div, and then finally div class card. So one of these we want to be a column. So let's look at this single day forecast card, which is this component here. And we you can see we actually have div. So we've got like duplicated div that we don't need. So I'm going to get rid of one of them and then turn this into a column. And I'll import column from React Bootstrap column. And bam, look at that. So I don't know what that semicolon is. Let's find out what that is. Yeah, there's a semicolon right here. Okay, so yeah, inside my row, I didn't specify any sort of width or anything like that for the row. And you don't have to, it'll just pick a default for you. And so this looks pretty good. Eventually it starts collapsing for me. That could look better, like if it was centered. And then we also want some margin below the button. So let's put a class. A class here, and then we're going to need some CSS. So we could actually just do forecast display.css and import that. And then forecast cards is the class name. And we want margin top of, let's say, 10 pixels or something. Okay, maybe a little more. Okay, that's better. And then, yeah, I'm trying to think how we can get. So yeah, maybe we can center. So maybe we can center the cards. I need to do something with Flexbox. But yeah, I think we would want we'd want to inside these columns, we want the cards to be kind of in the center. But I don't really want to spend a bunch of time doing that. But that's what I would do. I would spend time doing that if I was actually trying to deploy this in the real world. But this is roughly kind of what we were going for. Just kind of fix these cards a little bit. Okay, so next thing is my README. So daily forecast card condition, display the image and text description for the condition provided for the weather description in the daily forecast card. So we're just trying to add some more properties to this card. So that's dictated by excuse me. That's dictated by us displaying it inside this card here. One second. We need to display it in this card here, but then we also need to pass the data into the card, which is dictated, like this card receives it as props, and so we need to pass those in to the card. And here's kind of where we're pulling the information out that we care about. So if we look at the data coming over the network, whenever we do this fetch, we have this AJAX request that happens. Here's the request. We can do the preview of the data coming back. We're using forecast day. Then we look at each day individually. And then we look at day, and then there's a condition key. And that condition key has a text and then an icon here. It's kind of a funny looking URL, actually. I don't know what that is. That's what we want, is this icon. I don't know why that's the don't know why they have that // in the front. Let me see if one of the other days does too. That's bizarre. But yeah, those are the two properties we want. So we want to pull out icon, which will be forecast.day.condition.icon, and then const condition text equals forecast.day.condition.text. Just double check condition text, condition icon. Okay, and then we need to pass these in. So icon equals icon, condition text equals condition text. Okay, so we passed these in now. We pulled them out of the data. We passed it in, but the card doesn't actually read those props and display them. So we need to add that. Here's our card. We can just, I mean, it doesn't look good. I think you guys did stuff in class that looks better, but I'll just add 2 more list items. Condition will be props dot condition text. And then we don't need a description for an image. We would just put the image. And so we would do, image, the image tag source equals props dot image, or was it icon? I think. Oh, and then it needs to be all right, let's see what happened. Oh, that worked. I don't know. I thought that URL wouldn't work, but I guess it did. All right, so now we got, condition here. Oh, I didn't know it was going to rain today. And then here's our image. So that's pretty cool. Okay. All right. So cool. All right, now we want to add some content to the home page and have it automatically pull whenever the page loads. So far, we come to this page, we refresh it, and we don't actually see any data till we hit the search button. So we've got, on click of the button, go ahead and run the query. But when we go to the home page here, we just want it to go ahead and run the query just whenever the page loads. We don't want them to have to click a button or anything. And we also don't have anything showing on this page at all. So first off, the thing that dictates what shows up, depending on what page you're on, is in the app.js. And it's just where we put it. And we have our nav, which dictates just the top of the page and then what links are there. But all those links do, all they do is change the URL. The app then needs to have something configured that, based off what is in the URL, decides what to display. So here's the thing dictating what things are available to navigate to and then changes the URL to them. But then here's the thing that actually decides what to show based off the URL. So you kind of have to update them in tandem. You know, you add a page that's going to show up on a certain URL, and then you add a link to the URL. So you do both at the same time typically. So right now we only have one thing that is being added to the page based off of a URL, which is if the URL is forecast, then go ahead and render the forecast component, which has, you know, the form and the card display stuff that we just worked on. So we want to add another thing here, which they'll go to whenever they're on the root of the page or the home page. And that is just nothing. Like that's just like the root of the page. There is no, you know, /home/root. We just call it that. We say the root of the page or the home of the page. But that just means, you know, whenever you haven't navigated anywhere else, just like the base location. And the way that we represent that is with just the slash. So that's the root. And then we just need to decide what element we want to show. So if I didn't change this at all, right now we would get on the root page, we now get the forecast element. And when we go to the forecast page, we also get the forecast element because we're now rendering it in both places. But we want a new element. And I mean, we can make a new folder for this. We can put it here. I'll probably make a new folder called home, and then make this called home.js, and then export. You don't have to export a JSX element the way that they show you. Like you can do export, like you can just do, you know, function home a return. I'll just kind of set this up from the get-go in the more verbose format. So typically you'll see like, you know, you define the function, then you do export default home like this. One way you can do it. Or you can just do export default like this. Just one line it instead of having to do it on a separate line. Or you can do export function home, not saying default. And then whenever someone uses it, they would do, and so this is what's called a default import. We do import without the squigglies. Nav from React Bootstrap nav. That's importing the default thing. If you are just wanting to import something by name, which means you exported it like this without saying default, you can do that. You just have to do it by name. So we can do import home from /home/home. And this works as well. So we're saying import the thing called home that was exported from the ./home/home file. And so that's this. So there's like 3 ways that you can export a component. Just see them all. All right, and then so instead of forecast here, we want to render home. So I could do that. Yeah. Oh, it's mad at me. No, okay, now it's not. Okay, so now what we should see is just our H1 home. And so now we're hooked up to that URL. Whenever we click this, it routes us to the root. So when we're on forecast, we're on forecast. When we click weather, it takes us back to root. And on root, we've got home. So now we can do all our work inside home, and we can start adding the stuff that I described for that. But first thing is we need to just display the current weather. So there's actually a different URL that you can use for that. So I go to home, say const URL equals at. And then, I mean, we can reuse some of the stuff. Oh, interesting. Okay. We can reuse some of the stuff we have in forecast. That does our fetch. So, you know, we want to fetch the URL, get the data, set the weather data. So I'm going to make, so I'm just going to like move this over split screen and just kind of do some of that stuff over here. So we know we want like a function that will, this will be an async function. That will be, you know, get weather data. It will do const response equals await fetch URL. Const data is going to equal await response JSON. Then we know we're going to want a piece of state. So this is dealing with my spacing. Const weather data set weather data equals use state. Start as an empty object, and then we will do set weather data and passive data, and then use states not defined. So I need to import that. It's not giving me auto import. I don't know. Import use state from Act. So here's our get weather data. It's kind of like our on submit from the forecast page, but note that on submit is called by a form whenever we hit the submit button, and when you do that, it's associated with the form, and so the form actually passes in an event that we have to call prevent default on, and yada yada. We're going to have a similar function, but it's not being called by a form. We're going to call it whenever the page loads. And if you just like read the React docs and just kind of go through their tutorials, you'll come across like how you query data when the page loads, which is that you use something called use effect to do that. And it looks like use effect, and then you have a function you want to run whenever the effect happens, and then you have what's called a dependency array that dictates when the effect runs, And if you just give it an empty array, it means just run one time whenever the page loads, whenever this component is mounted or added to the page. So what we want to do is run the get weather data function whenever the page loads. And use effect is also something that comes from React. And so that is use effect. And then if we want to see if this is working, we can display something from it. So we can do, and keep in mind that we want to display something from weather data. We need to check and see if it's defined or not, because the page is going to load. It'll try and render. So it'll try and render some HTML, some JSX. And then we're going to send our query and wait for the query to come back. And then when the query comes back, we then set the weather data, which tells React to re-render. And then at that point, whenever we're doing our rendering piece, the weather data will be defined and we can actually pull data from it. So there's sort of two states that we have to decide what we want to have on the page for. And so if we do not have weather data dot, let me just see what so you can actually see the query running whenever the page loads here. So if we don't have weather data dot current, then we know that or location, either one, then we know the page isn't loaded yet. So we can do if not weather data dot current, then return. I mean, we could just start with like a p tag that says loading. So if we don't have the data, then just return into the function, like don't evaluate anything down here, loading. But if we do have weather data.current, then this won't run, and then we'll return this, which will be weather data.current. Let me see what's in here. So weather data.current. We can pull something out of condition. So condition weather data.current condition text. So you can see like we have loading for like a split second and then sunny. And you can actually slow the page down to see that. So it's loading the React app. Then we'll see loading, and it's still really fast because the cache is on. Okay. So it's loading the React app, then we'll see loading for a second. Loading, and then we get our response back. And then it changed from sunny to partly cloudy. right there. So that's cool. All right. Okay, so yeah, we've got that piece. So in the README, we want to create a new component, hook it up to the page, and then go ahead and get the weather data on page load. So we've done that. I didn't like pull a bunch of data out. I could have reused that single day forecast card on the home page. So like there's nothing stopping you from reusing components in multiple places. So we could do that, but I'll leave that as an exercise for the watcher. And move on to this astronomy page. So that's pretty similar to what we've done so far. We just need to do the effort of adding it as a link here. So we know we need a new link. It'll be to the astronomy page. And then it's kind of similar to home. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and rename it to astronomy. Name it to astronomy. And rename this to astronomy. And then inside this, we name this function home. We need to rename it astronomy. Okay. And in our app.js, so we've got this link to astronomy, but then we also need to tell it what to show on the page if they're on the astronomy route. So that'll be astronomy. And then instead of forecast, astronomy. And it auto imported that for me. You can see up here when I hit tab, it imported the astronomy component from astronomy/astronomy. So we can go ahead and see. Oh, that looks like crap. Oh, I think that's because we need these in their own navs. So this would be its own nav. Oh, no. All right, so I mean, we can just add some margin left. Yeah, so I think there's Devin was actually telling me there's just like a Bootstrap class that we can use to add that, which I think was like class name equals mg. Let's see what that was. So yeah, I'm gonna do ml maybe 2. Let's just try that. So class name ml2. Diggity dog. Look at that. Wait, no, that's still going. Right? That didn't work. So it has my class. I did this right. Yeah, I think that should have worked. I don't know if that class is defined. Yeah, we import the bootstrap. Pooey. It's not working. Let's try. Oh, that one showed up. Maybe just those aren't defined. Oh, I think I changed the name. Oh, they changed the name. What jerks? Okay, so margin S for start. Okay. Bada booey. Okay, so that I was looking at the docs for a different like version 4 of Bootstrap, and we're on version 5. So that's what that was. Okay. All right, so there we go. That looks a little better. And then if we go to astronomy, you can see we're on the astronomy page, but we haven't changed any of the content. It's still the same content as the root. So we'll go to astronomy and then change our stuff here. And the requirements said to, let me just leave this open. Said to use this other URL. So here's this. So I'll change the URL to that new one. And then I'm hard coding the date. And the astronomy thing only lets you go back like 3 days or so with the API. So I'm just going to change it to the 13th. You could also like actually, let me show you that. So we can do const current date equals new date. And then do JavaScript date. And that's what we want. We want the ISO date, which is to this format, year, month, day, year, month, day. So we should be able to do new date dot to ISO string to ISO. Where is it? Oh, that's the input. That is not the format that I want. Nope. So this is the closest. And I mean, I'm just gonna do like a quick. There's actually a library that you can install called Luxon that makes this easier, but I'm just gonna do like a cheat, which is substring 0 10. I don't think it includes. Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm just saying, give me the current time, turn it into an ISO string, which is like this thing, and then grab, like, just remove the time off of it, which this is in ISO time, just like 5 or 6 hours ahead of us. But I'm just grabbing the first 10 characters. So this is like my quick hack, which is buggy and potentially might give us the wrong date if you're, depending on the time zone you're in, potentially, but it's fine for now. So it's gonna do this so that you don't have to manually keep changing this date time that we pass here, so that we can just pass in the current date. And I'm hard coding the zip. That's fine for me. Okay, and so this is the astronomy URL. So instead of weather data, we probably should call it astronomy data set. Astronomy astronomy data set astronomy you could have found, like, done the find replace you wanted to. All right. And then I don't think current is in there. So let's see what is in there, like the key. So if we go to astronomy and stop throttling. Oh, yeah, I wasn't. Oh, yeah. So it doesn't have current. So it's constantly in the loading state because there is no current key. So we want astronomy dot astro dot, and let's just pull the moon phase out. So if astronomy data dot astronomy dot astro dot moon phase. Astronomy dot astro dot moon phase. Oh, and then I need to change this. So it's not astronomy dot astronomy. Boom! There we go. And you can see in our query that we send that is passing 2022-713 for us automatically. And so this will still run tomorrow when we run it. It'll update it to be the current date. All right, one thing left. So right now, when we go to the forecast page and we search, the URL isn't reflecting the location that we inputted or the days. So if we change this and do the search, Young America, cool. I don't know where that is. If we change this and notice the URL doesn't have that in it, and if we refresh the page or send this page to somebody, they're going to get the default, right? So how can we persist what was in the URL or what they typed in the form? And typically a good way to do that is to put it in the URL. So how do we update the URL with this information? So that's going to be on the forecast page, and then on this main forecast component is where we're going to do that. And so the first thing we want to do, we have two problems here. One is we need to read from the URL, and then the other is we need to update the URL. And really, we want to update the query parameter, because that's where I'd like to put this stuff. So I wanted to say like location equals 73106 and days equals 5. So because like this is the same page, but there's like a query parameter that's kind of changing the page a little bit. So we're using React Router, so you can look at the docs for React Router. Go to the docs, read the docs, quick start, potentially, but I know I want to look at query params, so I'm going to search, go down, and there's params, which is URL params, but then they're calling query params search params, which is probably the proper term. So search params is what gives you the query or the search in the URL. So the use search params hook is used to read and modify the query string in the URL for the current location. It'll return, when we use it, it'll return the current search params and a function to update them. So this has everything we need. And like you may have not been able to have found this so quickly if you were doing this the first time. So you probably would have done the quick start or the tutorial, and then you would have come across it. Then and they would have probably linked you to the documentation for this page. Okay. So just getting good at reading docs is something you'll get used to. So this is what we want. And you can see they're giving you an example here of doing search params, set search params. And they're actually giving you an example where you would be setting them from a form, which is exactly what we're doing. We're setting the search params from a form on the page. So let's grab this. I don't know why they put let. Most people put const there. No, so I don't know why they did that. But yeah, we're on the forecast page, and just kind of anywhere up in here we can put this. So I'll put it right here. And then this isn't imported because it comes from React Router. So we need to try to import it. Usually VS Code will do it for you, but it's not. So we can look at their docs for that, which is this. Import use search params from React Router DOM. And we do use search params, and then we have, instead of let, I'm going to do const search params and set search params. So this is very, very similar to the use state hook, which gives you the current value and a way to change it. That's exactly what, like, a lot of libraries and stuff follow that paradigm now. And so you see like the exact same thing. You call something, and then it gives you back these two things. When we submit, whenever they hit submit, not when they type or anything like that, but only when they hit submit. We could certainly change it when they type, but we don't actually run the query or anything until they submit. So we might as well update the URL whenever they submit. So whenever they submit, we're going to want to set the search params. And we have the query and the days in our state from like whenever like we have those two inputs hooked up to those two things. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, when they hit submit, we'll set, and you could do this up here or down here, just as long as it happens in the function. For us, it should be fine. So we'll do set search params, and then I don't really know what the syntax of that is. What a helpful example you put here. Type declaration. Okay. Ooh, you guys would have a hard time reading this. So, so this is what we need to pass in, this URL search params init. It's probably telling me that if I hover here. Yeah, you can see set search param takes this URL search params init. And the definition of that is here, which is either a string or a param key value pair. I have no idea what that is, or a record of string or URL search params. So record of string is really an object. It's just key value pairs, param key value pair array. So I think what we can do is say, here are our params. We want one called, well, we could call it query to keep in line with what we did, but on the front end, what they're going to see is location query days to forecast. So we can either call the param location or query. I'm going to pick location. So location is going to be query, and days is going to be days. Okay. So I'm saying, hey, set the search params to location and days. And so I'm assuming it's going to handle for me setting the URL to have, I don't know which ones it's going to do first, but it'll be like question mark days equals days and location equals location, or location. I don't know which one it's going to pick first, but probably locations is the first one I put in the thing. So I'm going to go to forecast. Oh, that's interesting. It doesn't change the forecast. All right, so go to forecast, change this. And let's see what it does. Woohoo! So you see how it added, when I hit search, it added location equals 55555 and days equals 2. So very cool. So we're updating it, but notice we're not using it in any way. So like if I manually changed it, or if I just refresh the page, for example, the URL state, like the search parameters are still there, but notice it's not being respected in the form, like because we're not actually reading anything from the search params. We're just putting something in the search params. So it's sort of like a two-step thing here as well, which is now we need to actually use the search params. Those are here. That's the current value of the search params. And so what we want to do is whenever the page loads, we want, instead of these values to be the default, we want to see if we have any search params. And if we do, then we want to set those to these values. And honestly, having a default of 5 and 73106 may not make any sense either. So if we don't have anything in the URL, maybe we want these to default to nothing. So it may not be a big deal if they're undefined or whatever. So now you'll notice we actually need to move this up because we need it whenever we're doing our use state here to set the default. And so we can do search params dot, I think we can just do, yeah, okay. So I think this is like this is the worst example that they could possibly give. Yeah, they don't actually give you an example of pulling anything out of the search params, but if they have any examples. Oh, they do have examples. Oh, search params. Okay. So you can see they've got their use search params here. And they then do the use search params, and you can see here's their example of pulling a parameter. So you do search params.get, then the name of the parameter. And let's see if they show you where they do set search params. So set search params, they do here, and you can see they did exactly what I did, which is pass an object with the user in it. So that's how you maybe would have been able to figure out what I figured out by looking at the type declaration. So yeah, we just need to do use state search params.get, and that will be days, and then this would be search. This would be search params dot get. We call it location. That's what we called it. Remember here, we pass location instead of query, so that's going to be location. Okay, let's see what happens. It works. Okay, so yeah, notice if I like manually set this and hit enter, whenever the page loads, it's respecting the fact that we did that. And then if I change it and hit search, you see it updates the URL. So very cool. And then I think I may have said to have it go ahead and run the query. Yeah, so if they do have anything in there, then go ahead and run the query. So to do that, I'm going to clean this up a little bit and do a new async function called submit weather query, and then move this stuff into it. So I'm just separating some stuff a little bit because notice when we hit submit, we do this prevent default, which passes in this event. And we want to submit the query and set the weather data and set loading whenever we run the query. And we want to set the search params. But whenever the page loads the first time, we don't want to set, and we do want to send the query if there are search params. We don't want to, we're not submitting it in a form anymore. And we also don't want to set the search params. Like we just want to run the query. So I'm kind of teasing out this logic from the onSubmit so I can call this separately if I wanted to, and it's not all coupled with the other stuff we want to do whenever we hit submit. So that's called a refactor, where you kind of move some stuff around a little bit and kind of just break it down a little bit more into smaller pieces. And so that means that we can essentially say, we can use another use effect, right? So whenever the page loads, we have the use effect function. And remember, if we want it to only happen on page load, we do this dependency array of nothing. And use effect's not imported, so I need to import it. And what we want to do is check and see, you know, if days and this is gonna I think I might want to do if I guess we can try my first thing. So if days and query, then submit the weather query. So this is a common confusing thing with use effect that you guys are going to run into, which is it's going to complain that you haven't put dependencies of the use effect because I'm referencing days query, submit weather query. It's saying, hey, those are dependencies of this use effect, and you should maybe watch for them. But if I add them, then anytime any of them change, it's going to run again. And I don't want to run this every time the days or the weather change, because they change, or days of the query change, because they change whenever they type. So I'm going to just see what's happening on the page whenever it loads. Yeah, so it's working now. But it's kind of mad at me. But I think this is what I would want in this case. I don't want it to run whenever those other things change. We could also do like whenever, we could also say if search params dot get location and run it, but it's going to complain about me not having the search params in there. But I don't want it to run every time the search params change either, because we run it. We already run it whenever the search params change, like we did the submit weather query and then set search params. So I mean, one thing we could potentially do, which I don't really like. Let's see if this is working too. So that's working too. So this is fine. This is one of the things people don't like about use effect, is this dependency tree thing. And you may see someone try to say, okay, well, the search params are a dependency, and so is submit weather query. So this isn't mad anymore. What are you mad about now? Oh, see, this is why people hate use effect. Yeah, so we're not going to deal with this. It's going to be crazy. So yeah, here's what I would, honestly, this is what I would probably have done. And that we're going to just call good. So yeah, it's working when we do that. And it's working when we do that. You can see it's updating the URL. And it's working when we do that too. So I think we're in good shape. And these are just warnings that we're getting here, which we could fix, but I'm not going to. Okay, that's it. I think that was everything that you need to do. Yeah, that's it besides the bonus, but I'm not going to do the bonus on this call. So thank you, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed the challenge.